Max was a large German shepherd, with a coat that gleamed in the sun and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of a much older soul. To anyone who didn't take the time to understand him, Max was intimidating. He was big, too big for some people's liking, and his bark could shake the walls of the house. But there was more to Max than just his size and bark. He had a heart full of loyalty and an eagerness to protect. Unfortunately, those qualities were seen as flaws rather than virtues. Max had been raised in a household that didn't understand the needs of a high-energy dog. His owners didn't know how to channel his enthusiasm and instincts, and instead of guiding him, they became frustrated. When Max got overly excited and started to bark too much, they scolded him. When his protective nature kicked in and he became suspicious of strangers, they called him aggressive. Instead of helping him, they pushed him away. The tipping point came when a neighbor's child was startled by Max's loud bark. The family, unable to cope with his boisterous personality, made the decision to surrender him to a shelter. They labeled him aggressive and uncontrollable, saying he was a danger to others. Max was thrown away like a discarded toy, left to face a future in a shelter with no guarantee of love or care. When he first arrived at the shelter, the staff was skeptical. They didn't see a dog in need of help. They saw a problem dog, one with too many issues. Max was placed in the section labeled Special Needs, where the more challenging dogs were kept. He had no one to visit him, no one to take him out for walks or spend time with him. Every day, he would sit by his kennel door, his large eyes watching anyone who passed by. His once lively bark had turned to a soft whimper. He didn't understand what he had done wrong, only that he was alone. Time moved slowly in the shelter. Other dogs came and went, some adopted quickly, others sent to foster homes. Max's file grew thick with notes and evaluations. Each one stated the same thing: unadoptable, dangerous, too much to handle. He felt as though no one would ever see beyond the surface. No one would ever understand him. But despite the constant rejection, Max never gave up hope. Every day he waited, watching the door, praying for someone who would see what he had to offer. He didn't want to be alone forever. He just wanted to find someone who could appreciate him for who he truly was, a loyal, protective dog who had been misunderstood, discarded, and thrown away. Max's days in the shelter became a blur of monotony, where the only consistency was the empty feeling of being ignored. The shelter was filled with dogs, each with their own story, but none quite like his. While other dogs wagged their tails or played with visitors, Max remained still, his dark eyes following every movement, but never showing his usual exuberance. He had learned that barking and jumping only pushed people further away, so he sat quietly in his kennel, hoping to be noticed for something other than his intimidating exterior. At first, a few staff members tried to work with him, but Max's fear and anxiety had caused him to react defensively. He wasn't violent, but he was cautious, and people often misinterpreted that. Whenever someone would approach his cage, his ears would flatten, his tail would drop, and his body would stiffen. His bark, though loud and deep, was his only way of defending himself from the unknown. It wasn't aggression, it was fear. Fear of being abandoned again, fear of never being wanted. But no one seemed to understand. The shelter was overcrowded, with dogs of all breeds and sizes vying for attention. Max was just one more dog in a sea of many. Most visitors walked by his kennel without even stopping to glance at him, their eyes scanning the more friendly dogs that seemed to have the right balance of energy, the ones who wagged their tails eagerly and responded to every command. Max had never been trained like that, and it left him at a disadvantage in a place where behavior was everything. Despite the lack of visitors, Max tried to remain hopeful. Every morning, when the staff opened the kennel doors, he would stand up, his ears perked, his eyes focused on the doorway. Maybe today would be the day someone would see beyond the bark, the protective instincts, and the label. Maybe today someone would understand that he wasn't a monster. He was simply a dog who had been misunderstood. But each day came and went, and no one came for him. It was heartbreaking. Even the other dogs, some of whom had been at the shelter longer than Max, began to notice his quiet sadness. They'd wag their tails when people walked by, but Max remained in the shadows, hoping for a miracle. Yet as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, he couldn't shake the feeling that his time was running out. Max had no idea what the future held. He didn't know that change was coming, but he had no choice but to wait. He could only hope that someone would come for him, that his true potential would be recognized, and that the dog everyone called a monster would finally find the family he deserved. One chilly afternoon, a new face appeared at the shelter. Officer Daniels, a seasoned K-9 handler, stepped through the door with a quiet confidence. He wasn't like the other visitors who came to the shelter in search of a perfect dog. Daniels wasn't looking for a dog that would sit quietly and follow orders right away. He was searching for potential, something deeper than the surface. As he walked down the aisles of kennels, his eyes scanned each dog, pausing for a moment on everyone. Some barked eagerly, hoping to make a connection. Others sat quietly, awaiting attention. But it was Max who caught his attention, not because of his loud bark or imposing size, but because of the way he stood in the back of his cage, watching the world with a mixture of wariness and hope. Officer Daniels stopped in front of Max's kennel. Max's eyes, usually filled with uncertainty, met his gaze directly. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them. Max's ears were slightly tilted back, his posture tense, but there was something else, a spark of intelligence, a yearning to connect. He wasn't just a dog barking to be noticed. He was a dog waiting to be understood. Unlike others who had been frightened by Max's loud voice, Officer Daniels remained calm. He didn't flinch or step back. Instead, he crouched down to Max's level, speaking softly but firmly. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice steady. "You're not the monster they think you are." Max watched the man closely. His nose twitched at the unfamiliar scent, but there was something reassuring in the officer's tone. Slowly, Max took a step forward, then another. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply moved closer, as though he was testing the waters, trying to decide if this man was different from the others who had passed him by. Officer Daniels didn't make any sudden moves. He remained still, allowing Max to come to him. The silence between them spoke volumes. Max was cautious, but he wasn't afraid. This was a moment of trust, a moment where Max realized that not all humans were the same. Not all would reject him. And this officer, unlike the others, wasn't afraid of what Max might become. He saw the potential that lay beneath the surface. The officer gently extended his hand toward Max. It wasn't an invitation to pet him, just a gesture of understanding, a sign that he saw the real dog beneath the labels. Max took another step forward, his nose brushing against Daniel's hand. For the first time in a long while, Max felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Daniel smiled, knowing that this moment was the beginning of something new. It wasn't going to be easy. Max had been through too much. But Daniels was ready. He knew he wasn't just adopting a dog. He was offering a second chance, and he had a feeling that Max was about to show the world just how incredible he really was. The transition from shelter life to K-9 training was a challenge for Max. He was used to a routine that was slow, often filled with isolation, and didn't require him to follow commands or focus on anything beyond his own survival. Now he was in a completely new environment, one that demanded his full attention. Officer Daniels, however, was patient, understanding that Max's past had left deep scars. At first, Max struggled. The barking commands and strict discipline were overwhelming. He wasn't used to being told what to do. In the shelter, he had learned to take care of himself, to be suspicious of the world around him. But Officer Daniels wasn't just giving him commands. He was teaching Max how to trust again. Every day, Daniels spent hours with Max. They started with the basics: sit, stay, and heel. It wasn't easy. Max would often stand still, confused by the sudden change in his life. He didn't know how to sit on command. He didn't know what stay meant, or why Daniels wanted him to wait before moving. But Daniels never grew frustrated. He knew it was going to take time. He knew Max was smart, but trust had to come first. There were moments when Max would resist. Sometimes he would look away, avoiding eye contact, as though unsure of what Daniels was asking. Other times, he would grow anxious and pace in circles. But Daniels was patient, giving him space to process. Slowly, Max began to realize that the commands weren't a punishment. They were a way of communicating, a way of finding structure in a world that had once been chaotic. After a week of training, something clicked. One afternoon, as they practiced walking together on a leash, Max finally understood the purpose of the heel command. He matched Daniel's pace, walking beside him, his body relaxed for the first time since arriving. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where Max would get distracted, pulling away when something caught his attention. But it was progress. Small, but significant. The breakthrough came when Max learned to sit on command. It wasn't a huge achievement in the world of dog training, but for Max, it felt like winning a championship. Officer Daniels knelt beside him, rubbing his head gently. "Good boy, Max," he said, his voice filled with pride. Max's tail wagged slowly, the first time he had shown such affection in weeks. He wasn't just learning commands. He was learning to trust again, to believe that someone cared enough to teach him. The bond between them began to grow stronger. Daniels wasn't just his trainer. He was his protector, his guide, and most importantly, he was the one person who saw Max for what he truly was, not a monster, but a dog with potential. As the weeks passed, Max began to excel. His natural instincts as a protector and his incredible intelligence became evident. He was quick to pick up new tasks, especially in scent detection and tracking. It was as if Max had always known what to do. He just needed someone to show him the way. Officer Daniels knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't sure where Max's future would lead, but one thing was certain. The dog who had been abandoned and misunderstood had found a new purpose, and together they were about to embark on a journey that would change both their lives forever. You said, months of intense training had finally paid off. Max was no longer the dog who had been abandoned at the shelter. He had grown into a capable, disciplined K-9 officer, earning his place in the K-9 unit. But Max's real test came on a crisp autumn day, one that would prove to everyone, especially the people who had once given up on him, that he was no longer just the monster they had thought him to be. It was a typical day when the call came in. A young child had gone missing in a dense forest just outside the city. The child, only 7 years old, had wandered off while playing near the edge of the woods. By the time the search parties were organized, hours had passed. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Time was critical. Max, alongside Officer Daniels, was deployed to assist in the search. As they arrived at the scene, the urgency of the situation hit Max like a wave. He could sense the fear in the air, the tension in the voices of the officers, and the frantic parents. Daniels gave Max a firm but gentle pat on the side. "We're counting on you, buddy," he said. Max's ears perked up, and for the first time, his body language was steady. He was ready. The team moved into the woods, and the moment Max stepped onto the trail, his instincts kicked in. His nose twitched as he took in the scents around him. Officer Daniels kept a steady pace beside him, trusting Max to lead the way. They had trained for situations like this, but no amount of preparation could have fully prepared them for what would come next. Max sniffed the air, then the ground, his keen nose picking up the faintest traces of the child's scent. He was fast, moving with a quiet determination as Daniels kept up beside him. Max's focus was unmatched, his movements fluid and confident. He was no longer the fearful dog from the shelter. He was a skilled search and rescue dog, and this mission was his moment to shine. For 2 hours, they searched tirelessly. The woods were dense, and the fading light made it difficult to see, But Max didn't waver. He continued to track, nose to the ground, ears alert for any sound. Officer Daniels could see the signs of exhaustion in Max, his movements slower, his breathing deeper, but the dog never stopped. Max knew what was at stake. Then, as they pushed further into the woods, Max suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, his nose in the air. He sniffed around, then moved confidently toward a thick cluster of trees. Officer Daniels followed closely behind. Max led him to a small clearing, where the child was huddled under a fallen tree, crying softly. She had gotten lost and injured herself while trying to find her way out, but she was alive. Max barked once, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet woods. Daniels immediately called for backup. Within minutes, the rest of the rescue team arrived, and the child was safely brought out of the woods. The rescue was a success. Max, once thought of as nothing more than a discarded dog, had just saved a life. The child was reunited with her family, safe and unharmed, and Max had proven that he was more than capable of handling the responsibilities of a K-9 officer. Officer Daniels stood by his side, his heart swelling with pride. Max had done it. The dog who had once been rejected had now earned the respect and admiration of everyone around him. The news of Max's heroic rescue spread like wildfire. Local news outlets ran stories, and social media buzzed with the tale of the dog who had once been abandoned and called a monster, but had now saved a child's life. The community was stunned. How could the same dog who had been deemed unadoptable, dangerous, and unworthy of a second chance now be the hero of the day? Max became a local celebrity. People who had once turned away from him, afraid of his imposing size and loud bark, now saw him in a new light. The headlines read, "Dog once called a monster now saves a life." And the hero no one believed in. Max, the misunderstood German Shepherd, had proven that no one should ever be judged solely by their past. At the shelter, where Max had spent months in isolation, staff members were equally shocked. The dog they had all but given up on had become a symbol of redemption. The director of the shelter gave a statement to the press, praising Max's transformation and encouraging other shelters to take a second look at the animals they housed. Max's story reminds us all, the director said, that every animal deserves a chance. We must look beyond the surface and see the potential in every creature. As the story of Max's bravery continued to make the rounds, Officer Daniels found himself bombarded with calls and messages. People from all over the city, and even from neighboring towns, reached out to express their admiration. Many offered to donate to the K-9 unit, wanting to help provide more training for dogs like Max. Others wrote letters, praising the partnership between Daniels and his K-9 companion. But it wasn't just the community that was touched by Max's heroism. Max had changed the way people viewed rescue dogs, particularly those who had been labeled difficult or aggressive. In schools, children were learning about Max's journey. Officers and K-9 handlers gave talks about the importance of second chances and how animals, like people, can surprise you when given the opportunity to grow. Max was invited to schools to meet the children who had followed his story. There, in front of a crowd of wide-eyed students, Max demonstrated some of his skills: obedience, scent detection, and even a few tricks he had learned. The children were in awe, and Max soaked up the attention, his tail wagging happily. He was no longer the dog who was ignored in the back of a shelter. He was the star of the show, the dog who had captured hearts and changed lives. For Officer Daniels, seeing Max's impact on the community was humbling. He had always known that Max was special, but now the world was beginning to see it too. Max wasn't just a partner anymore. He was a symbol of what could happen when someone took a chance on the underdog. He wasn't the monster the world had once seen. He was a hero, and he had earned that title, not through force, but through trust, patience, and determination. Max had truly turned his life around, and in doing so, he had earned the love and admiration of an entire community. He was no longer the dog left behind. He was the dog who had found his place, his purpose, and his family. Max's journey from the shelter to becoming a local hero had ignited a ripple effect far beyond what anyone could have imagined. His story was one of hope, perseverance, and the power of second chances. But the impact of his transformation wasn't just felt by the people who had met him in person or heard about his rescue. It began to change the very way people looked at shelter animals, especially those who had been overlooked or misunderstood. In the months following the rescue, the shelter where Max had spent so much time began to see a shift in how they handled their animals. The director and staff, deeply moved by Max's success, worked to implement new training programs aimed at helping difficult or aggressive dogs. They created a system that focused on understanding the animal's needs and behaviors before making a judgment. The label of unadoptable was redefined, as more dogs were given a chance to show their true potential, just as Max had. Other local shelters took notice of the changes and began adopting similar approaches. The story of Max's rescue was used as a teaching tool for animal shelters and rescue groups across the region. Max became a living example of what could happen when a dog was given the right guidance and time. Shelters started to embrace the idea that a dog's past didn't define its future. They learned that sometimes, with the right care and patience, even the most misunderstood animals could thrive in the right environment. Max's influence didn't stop at the shelters. Schools across the city began incorporating his story into their lessons. Children were taught about kindness, understanding, and the importance of not judging others based on preconceived notions. Max's tale became an essential part of lessons on empathy, and his journey was discussed in classrooms as an example of how a little patience and trust could make a world of difference. One of the most touching aspects of Max's legacy was his role in local schools. Officer Daniels would visit classrooms with Max at his side, where he was greeted with awe and admiration by students who had followed his story. Max, now older and more comfortable in his role, sat calmly next to Daniels, letting the children approach him and pet him gently. Max's presence in those classrooms was a powerful lesson in overcoming adversity and the strength of redemption. Through it all, Max remained humble. He had no idea that his journey was inspiring so many people. To him, he was simply doing what he had been trained to do, helping others. But in the process, he had become something more. He had become a symbol that even the most misunderstood, even the most discarded, could rise to greatness. Max's story wasn't just about a dog finding a home. It was about showing the world that everyone, human or animal, deserved a second chance. His legacy lived on in every dog that was given a new opportunity and in every person who learned to look beyond the surface and see the potential within. Max, the dog once called a monster, had become a living testament to the power of redemption, proving that with love, patience, and understanding, anyone could change their story. Years passed, and Max's story continued to inspire people far and wide. The once feared German Shepherd, who had been abandoned and misunderstood, had become an enduring symbol of redemption and second chances. His transformation from a shelter dog with a bleak future to a heroic K-9 officer had left a lasting mark on the community and beyond. When Max retired from active service, it wasn't the end of his journey. It was a new chapter. By then, he had seen it all. From the intense training to life-saving missions, from being misunderstood to being embraced by the community. Max had been a protector, a hero, and a friend. Now, he would get the quiet life he deserved, living out his days with Officer Daniels, who had officially adopted him. Retirement didn't mean that Max's presence faded. He remained a constant reminder to everyone who met him of the power of transformation. Officer Daniels took Max to schools, local events, and even charity fundraisers, where people who had followed his story could meet the dog who had stolen their hearts. Max, always calm and dignified, had become the face of a campaign for shelter animals everywhere. His life was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. It was defined by his strength, loyalty, and the love he had given to everyone around him. In the years that followed, Max's legacy continued to inspire those who came into contact with him. His story was featured in documentaries about animal rescue and second chances, reaching even more people who hadn't heard about the dog who had been thrown away and was now changing lives. Shelters across the country began to use his story as part of their campaigns to adopt out older or difficult dogs, and countless animals who might have been overlooked found new homes because of the lessons learned from Max's journey. Officer Daniels often found himself reflecting on how much Max had changed his own life. What began as a partnership formed out of necessity had become something much deeper. Max had been more than just a working dog. He had been a reminder of how important it was to never give up on someone, no matter how difficult their past might seem. Max's influence had shaped Officer Daniels' approach to his work, and he carried that lesson with him every day. Max's days were now spent lounging in the sun, playing with children who still marveled at his story, and enjoying long walks with Officer Daniels. The man who had once been uncertain about adopting a dog who was labeled a problem now couldn't imagine life without him. Max had become not just a hero in the field, but a beloved member of his family. As Max aged, his body grew slower, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. The community never forgot the dog who had defied the odds, and Max's memory would live on in every life he had touched. He was no longer the dog who had been left behind. He was the dog who had found his purpose, and in doing so, had shown the world that no one is ever truly lost. Max's legacy wasn't just about his service, his rescues, or the love he had given. It was about showing the world that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones we overlook, the ones who have been discarded, misunderstood, or ignored. With one second chance, Max had shown that every creature deserves a future, and that future could be brighter than anyone could imagine.